Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I am up late on a hot August night for metalheads. What I'm doing here is I wanted to demonstrate what can be done with my plugin Slew in the place of using a tube screamer on the input of your heavy guitar amp. I made a little recording, and we are again. I've got my tube screamer, and I used it for one of these examples, namely this one. That's this guy. It was set like this. It's a slightly modified tube screamer, but not heavily modified, just a little tweaking on it. My point being that the tube screamer has a number of purposes, a number of things that it does. And only one of them is the input filter that restrains extreme low frequencies. There's also a behavior that's part of the op-amp chip inside it, and that slows down the attack of waveforms so that you can kind of soften and grunge up pick attacks and things. And I can show you that very easily by switching back and forth between the recording of this real tube screamer. It's not an emulation, it's a real thing. And the plain input, because I ran a Y chord and I record both regular and tube screamer sound simultaneously. They're running into this virtual amp. This is the one. It is the Lepu 456. I got Space Designer with a God's Cab sample. It's a free sample that you can download. And the combination of these things, and you can probably see my settings on there, it's exactly the same settings in each one. One neat thing about plugins is you can duplicate them like that. And as you can hear, the tube screamer itself sounds like this. Now the raw input into the same amplifier sounds more like this. Now you notice that's not as interesting on several grounds. One of them is it doesn't have the scrunch that the real tube screamer had. The other is that it has more low frequencies going on. But what would happen if you could have some of that scrunch and still have the low frequencies in a different kind of way and a variation on this sound? Because one of the things about it is it's a little bit indistinct. And this is the real thing. That's not even an emulation. That's a real tube screamer, but it's still a little bit sort of fuzzy and indistinct. Well, here's what you do. Run my Slew plugin. It's an audio unit and Mac and PC VST. They are all free. I'm running a Patreon. So these are all free plugins, and the hope is that I can continue to make you more and do more of this kind of stuff. And it sounds kind of like this. Now notice the differences. The plain one sounds like this. Now that chunk, 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 chunk is not as chunky as like the real one, but it's a little bit more chunky than this. And the reason is Slew is supplying slew clipping on the input of the signal, and that's part of what's causing the chug and abrasive sound. I can even demonstrate more about this by playing with the control. For instance, if I dial it back, there's nothing. But if we make it too intense, it definitely gets chuggy. but it can get too chuggy. You can have something like that, and it's got a similar amount of grind and chug, but it's just all extreme lows. So we can sort of pull it back a little bit. And get it away from this sort of thing. Tell you what, let's go find another bit of music because, well, if you want to call this music, because this is not all that thrilling. What have we got here? That's interesting. So this is a real tube screamer, and then if we, the plain one is like this. That's pretty terrible. That's nowhere near as good as this. Because this has that grind in it. And that's no grind. But if we go to the Slew plugin, you can hear a kind of similarity in there. Like this one really has all the scrunch you could want. Bear in mind, Slew is not a distortion circuit. Anything that you might find as a TS9 or a tube screamer emulation is going to have all kinds of distortion stuff added to it. This is not that. This is only a way of restricting the input signal, conditioning the input signal with extreme cleanness and clarity. And you can have some of that scrubbing kind of noise that you completely lack with that. With plain, it's completely lacking, but you can have pretty much any amount of chug that you want. Or pull it back. Get a little more of the top in there. And yeah, it's lacking in the ability to control the bottom, so you might not want to put the low frequency boost in there or anything. But there is one more trick that Slew can play for you, and that is thus. You can also put it after the amp sim. So again, we got the rail tube screamer, and that's conditioning the lows much better. And it's all scrunchy, but it's maybe a little bit too indistinct. Then you've got plain, deeply uninspiring. Then you've got the one with Slew, and that gives us some of the chug on the input, but then when we turn on Slew after the amp sim, but before the cabinet, you get something like this. That's very different from the raw amp sim sound. And you got this. I can highlight that better with another example. For instance, let's just itch that over a little bit. Now that one dry is sounding kind of like this. That peep jumps right out. And with the real tube screamer, you get a good quality, but it's kind of indistinct. And then using Slew, which is a simpler process, it's rawer than using a full-on tube simulator, I mean a TS9 simulator. And we're getting some of the roundness back. And then lastly, we can fool around with this one's settings as well. Like, listen to what it's doing. You can really stomp on that a lot. It acts kind of like a variac on the output tubes of the virtual amp. It's drastically restricting the amount of total flip out that it can do. You can hear that very clearly in this. This is a little riff that it's obviously good through the real TS9. Again, this is not anybody else's emulation or whatever. This is the real thing. And the raw one is very uninspiring. But we can take the one with the slew in it, turn a little bit more chug on the beginning. And remember, I'm not touching any of the amp simulators. I could tweak some of the high frequencies and stuff in there, but I'm leaving them all exactly the same for the purposes of demonstration. We're going to take this and fool around with the slew between amp sim and cabinet sim and get some kind of maybe more of a chuggy tone, a tone that's closer to this. In fact, I might even fool with the brightness on the amp just to get my reaction out of what I'm trying to do here. Firstly, let's check to make sure this is the right one. Yep. Now I can bring in the clamping on the one between the amp and the cab. And that's now made it completely dull. You compare it with the real one. But notice that the chug through that, the top end is sort of rounded off because it's a real tube screamer. So, to get this out of this one, let some of the more of the highs out, and then just fooling with it a little bit, maybe a little more drive. Definitely a little more drive. Pull this back some more. Pull the bass back a little bit to balance out what's being done. This is definitely giving a lot more drive. Give it a little more treble. And remember, this is with no slew, so you can warm it up like that, and then this is about where it darkens. So that's the real tube screamer. And then this is not tube screamer at all. This is just a alternate way of doing things that can get you some of the same effects. And you go from this to this. Now that's got its own personality going on there. I matched gain, I matched a number of things. So what we could do is a little stereo, and here is our real tube screamer, and then here is our slew oriented one. And we'll listen to them both. And just for shits and giggles, this is what you get without any of this stuff, without a real tube screamer and without my free plugin. No, I don't think so. We'll go back to our left and right real tube screamer and slew. Hope you find this useful.